Kingdoms of Miraja is my dream game that I made 8 years ago that kickstarted my journey into game development. A few years ago, I decided to rebuild it from the ground up, and today I want to talk about what I've done over the last couple years, what happened to Kingdoms of Miraja, and what the future for it looks like. The original Kingdoms of Miraja release wasn't that great. It was buggy, the art was programmer art, and I hadn't started my career as a software engineer yet, so it was more of a learning experience than anything. But people played it, were very supportive, and it was the first time something I made really felt appreciated. It was wonderful even with all of its issues. So I decided that I didn't want to let it die. However, there were a lot of issues that were preventing me from continuing development of the game. One of the biggest ones was actually Unity itself. My first big leap into networking was with Unity's UNet, which was the original built-in networking for the game engine. It was relatively simple and things generally just worked, so I was really happy with it. However, around the time I released Kingdoms of Miraja, they decided to discontinue UNet. This wouldn't be a problem if it was an external library that I could just update myself to work with the new versions of Unity, but instead it was a built-in part of Unity, and once it was discontinued, there was no way to upgrade. Well, I think some code existed and you could grab that code and technically make it work. And later Mirror was released, which was very similar to UNet and worked as a replacement with minor updates. But I had already made a mess of my code base by the time I realized there were some other solutions, so it was just better to move on from all of that anyway. Also, between being generally busy in life and going through a terrible illness for quite a few years, by the time I came back to being in a place to really work on the game, my skills as a software engineer had increased drastically, so every function in the code just seemed like something that needed to be rewritten. So by that point, I was definitely determined to rewrite the entire codebase of the game. Originally, the goal was to leave Kingdoms of Miraja up as Kingdoms of Miraja Classic, and the rewrite would be a sequel. But as I worked on the sequel, I didn't like the idea of the original one going offline forever. Game preservation has been important to me for quite some time, so more recently I decided to convert Kingdoms of Miraja Classic to basically the engine that the new Kingdoms of Miraja is running on, since I built the new version on all the same concepts. It's been pretty easy to merge a lot of the new changes in, while keeping all of the unit stats, tick timings, art, and just the general feeling of the original. All while being able to improve the lighting, the textures, especially on the tiles. The textures on the tiles made a drastic difference to the feeling of the game. To really get the original vision that I was going for, but I didn't have the time or skills to do. My wife actually made all of the new art, so that's helped a lot. And also, the move to the newer version of Unity and being able to use URP drastically improved the feeling of the game. One of the next important changes was reducing the maintenance, which was the original reason the servers ended up needing to come down. Nothing was optimized, things constantly broke. The amount of times I had to manually intervene with the server became just a major problem. Also, it was quite expensive to host over time with the way my hosting was set up. All of these things needed some love and care to improve, but until that love and care was given, it really just wasn't viable to keep the game running. This was the biggest reason the servers had to come down after about 6 years of running. So now the game has automated builds, monthly seasons where the map resets with the rewards given, new maps get generated automatically, and I have alerts set for if it crashes, but in theory these things shouldn't happen. I have it designed to recover gracefully when it does happen. However, I do know how these things go, so I went ahead and set up the alerts because it's better to know when something does go wrong. This is something that should have been done originally that I just didn't have the skills to do when I started. It all seemed quite out of reach at the time, especially from a time perspective. It's not the doing it that's difficult, it's the time to learn it that's time consuming. Once you have these skills, it's very simple to go about implementing this kind of stuff. Another major quality of life improvement added to the game is Fog of War. Originally, you could move around the map and see everything, and one of the biggest problems with this is that players could immediately spot new players to attack them. With Fog of War, there's much more balance to the game, and combat against newer players becomes more risky since you don't know how much they have and how long they've actually been playing. This was in my original vision for the game, but I didn't understand how to make it more performant. However, now we have a very performant Fog of War in the game. It's very satisfying to actually see it in the game. It makes the game feel like there's so much more depth to it. Speaking of performance, I always wanted the game to be able to run on almost anything. I wanted it to be able to easily run over dial-up, and I was successful at that. I grew up on dial-up, and I remember waiting hours for RuneScape to load after an update. But while I hit my goals on networking performance, I did very, very badly when it came to actual optimization. On the Steam Deck, we went from around 20 FPS max and micro stutters happening regularly to now consistently maxing out the 120 FPS cap that I play with. The two biggest contributors were the mesh generation for tiles that I ported over from the new kingdoms I'm working on, but also a large part came from being able to update my Unity to an 8-year newer version and move over to URP. Pathfinding also got a major upgrade for the server. Just looking at a really bad benchmark, it seems to be about 10 times faster. But it's hard to compare exactly because the way user actions are routed into the pathfinding also became a lot more performant. So it's a great example of how compounding bad mistakes add up. And in this case, really bad mistakes on my part. Since my first attempt learning about pathfinding was during the original creation of Kingdoms of Miraja, and specifically just watching the first YouTube video I found, I didn't understand anything about A-Star, and then when I rewrote it years later, it's just truly shocking that the original even worked. That's the majority of changes into the game. I have a lot more in the pipeline currently. One of the biggest ones is AI factions, so even if the game becomes completely dead, you'll always be able to have some fun with it. I have basic AI factions in the game now, but I'm learning a lot about AI right now, so as I go, I'm spending a lot more time testing than I am actually building anything. Hopefully my next update, though, can have the AI in and working. Also, I hosted a playtest on February 7th. It was really awesome to see just how many people showed up to play just because they really enjoyed the original. The feedback from the playtest was super helpful and definitely helped me find a ton of bugs I wouldn't have spotted before. I'm planning on doing another playtest next month, so if you're interested in playing the game, definitely subscribe and join the Discord. Otherwise, I'll catch you in the next update.